Okay, here's the video for chapter 20. I'm going to go through talking about the emergence of urban America. And so it's going to continue a little bit of what we did in in chapter 18, and talking about the cities and the business and kind of going back and focusing on the northeast, and that area. Okay, so starting off looking at the urban growth side, a little bit of an overview, and that the city and looking at the big cities, these urban centers, that this is going to be where you see kind of the symbol of the new America, the symbol of growth, of business, of huge increase of immigration, and just kind of this change of culture. The city and its culture is going to become the new definition of success and prosperity and development in the United States. Whereas before, we really saw a focus on that on the westward expansion side with Manifest Destiny and the kind of American dream idea of new land. There's a lot more focus on the business side that's going to be happening in the cities. Starting out with some of the bigger cities as well. Huge growth in urban areas with immigration, more people coming into the country. The new immigrants that we talked about from 1880 on, and that new immigrant from South and Eastern Europe is a huge increase. You have a lot of new problems that come with that too. Whereas the cities start to get overpopulated, that idea of urbanization with a large increase of people in a small amount of place, you have more homeless. Not as many factories are offering as much work, or at least not enough pay to have a place to live on your own. There's a lot of new technological advances that allow the city to kind of expand vertically, so you start seeing bigger buildings, so fitting more people in a smaller space because you start getting those taller buildings. Heating systems, electric elevators, steel frame buildings. We talked about Carnegie and steel, and now using that steel to make the infrastructure for the new buildings so that they can actually start to become taller. Some of the major big cities that you see, most of them centered in the northeast. And then by 1920, so we're starting to see a lot of that start to push its way farther and farther west and fill in more. So 1880, the beginning of the Gilded Age, to the end of the Progressive Era by 1920. Public transportation is another new feature that allows the cities to grow that much more. Cable cars, steam-powered trains, electric trolleys, subways. Mass transit is going to allow people to become more mobile. Whereas before you had to live near your work and within walking distance, with mass transportation, you can actually start to commute, and kind of helps a little bit. As we get later into the turn of the century, early 1900s, you're also going to see the early automobiles allowing for the middle class to move out to the suburbs. And so that kind of changes the demographic of the city a little bit as well. So that's part of that first point with the mass transit. And then more economic and social opportunities. You have business opportunities. You have new jobs, whether that's coming from an international standpoint or just the freedom to choose how you want to live. You have very big gap between the wealthy and the not a lot of middle class in between. Opportunities for women are going to change with jobs. There's a lot more women working. The horrible living conditions were very, very common, unfortunately. Those who moved to the cities often have very crowded apartments. Usually the most common structure for that was a tenement or a dumbbell tenement. Dumbbell because the shape of the building from the top looked like the shape of a dumbbell or weights. A lot of overcrowding, a lot of fire hazards, poor ventilation. Disease was common because just hygiene was not great. They smelled horrible. You usually didn't have any privacy, no free space, and a lot of increased mortality rate, especially among the poorer classes. Political machines were very common. They're local committees or groups. Usually had local committees, district captains, and a political boss, and the bosses usually would grant favors for and services. They'd help give you food, heating, money, help sponsoring English classes, helping you kind of get adjusted to your new way of life, and in exchange you usually would vote the way they wanted you to vote. Ethnic neighborhoods were very common, especially among a lot of those new immigrants, and that you had a lot of combinations or kind of gatherings of the different ethnic groups, and there was not going to be a lot of mobility beyond those. So you'd have Little Italy and Little Poland and Chinatown within the big cities, and that ethnic neighborhood stayed pretty intact. For the political machines, one of the positive things that they would do would help with some of the infrastructure and kind of the overall structure of the city, the local city, helping with cleanup or different city projects. But public health is something that we're going to be seeing is on a decline. And when we start to see the reforms of the progressive era, that's one of the things that they're going to focus on. Urbanization. This is a garbage cart instead of garbage trucks, horse-drawn carts. Cities just, it smelled. There's a lot of trash, a lot of community bathrooms, horses, horse manure. Problem was a big, problem because it just smelled. There's a lot of fertilizer uses for that, so it's some recycling, but it's a lot of waste dump in the city. Here's some new characteristics of the new frontier. As the city is a new frontier, you have new architectural style with the new skyscrapers and the first class of skyscrapers, new use of space, class diversity, energy opportunities with electric power having come in with the new innovations, second industrial revolution. The melting pot idea is starting out with a lot of the new immigrants that are coming in. Crime and corruption. We also see some of the new dream ideas with people like Rockefeller and Carnegie kind of making this wealth and this amount of wealth a whole new level. Some of the new innovations that we had at this point, heating systems, electric elevators. I think I read through some of these already. Overall, a much higher quality of life and standard of living. And actually the U.S., despite the poverty classes living conditions, the U.S. itself had one of the highest standards of living worldwide. This is what a tenement would look like, some of the conditions. You can see the massive amount of trash and debris. There's not an efficient way to clean it, and plus you're just so overcrowded anyways. You would have horrible sanitation, polluted water because we don't have federal mandates on waste removal from factory plants or cities themselves, and so a lot of the waste was getting dumped into the waterways, and then rural populations had to deal with it when it was downstream. So a lot of ecological problems. Urban problems, just overall poor public health, because these are really bad conditions for people to live in, and so the more they're living in this squalor, the more that they're going to see their health decline. And more juvenile crime, a lot of times the kids were sent out to sleep in the halls or the public areas, hallways, balconies, stairwells, and just also not being monitored because every family member is working, so you have more juvenile crime as an increase. This is what a city block might look like. This one is Lower East Side, New York. Very, very crowded, not a lot of space. Like I said, they're small, they don't take up much space, so they might have to sleep on the balcony instead of inside if the weather was nice. This is what a dumbbell tenement would look like. You can see this is kind of an aerial view of it, so you can see how it kind of looks like a dumbbell weight in the shape. This would be an apartment on either side, so 4 to a floor, and then or to a section. In this section of these 4 apartments, you would have anywhere from 4 to 16 families living in that particular level. Where it says WC, that means water closet. That's like a public toilet, and so you'd have all those 4 to 16 families sharing those two. So the hygiene and just the sanitation level was not ideal. We're going to start talking about Jacob Riis. I think he's technically mentioned in one of your later chapters, but he's good to kind of have a reference. He is going to start developing in 1890 a book called How the Other Half Lived, and it showed the conditions of the poor. And he's going to go around and expose that to your upper and upper middle class to try to get some reforms and some changes happening for the way that people were living, just because the quality was so horrific. These are some of the pictures that he featured in his book to show the living conditions of the masses, especially in the cities. This was a really common one of his. This would, you didn't just have people sleeping in the bedrooms, but this would also, most likely be your kitchen as well. And there's, bunks of people just crowded in one space together. Another example of one family living in one room. The new immigrants, like I said, South and Eastern Europe, and there's going to be a lot of increase towards nativism. Nativism being pushing back against anything that is foreign influence or immigrant influence. By 1890, 4 out of 5 New Yorkers were foreign born. In 1893, Chicago had the largest Bohemian population in the world, and a lot of these immigrants are coming from famine, conditions, racial, political, religious persecution, military service. A lot of people just coming in because there's new opportunities, and where their own countries don't have anything new, more immigrants are being pulled by American dream ideas, and there are some push factors, but a lot more of the pull factors is what I'm trying to get at. There was a couple of acts. Contract Labor Act, 1864. The federal government encouraged immigration by helping pay an immigrant's passage. Kind of reminds you of like an indentured servant contract. Repealed in 1868, but the general effects are going to last well within the Gilded Age. Immigration is going to peak around 1900, 1910. Before 1880, it was mostly the old immigrants, North and Western Europe, so Ireland, England, Germany, Scandinavia. Those are your more common countries, and then the new immigrants are Italians, Hungarians, Czechs, Russians, Greeks. A lot more of a new kind of immigrant with a lot of new backgrounds. Ellis Island is your immigration hub for a lot of this, for European immigration coming in. And there's going to be a lot of, there's some corruption, and there's some discrimination against groups as well that were coming through Ellis Island, people that weren't allowed to come into the country for various reasons. You can see a good image here. This one I like. You can see the North and Western Europeans, kind of starts to decrease a little bit as conditions there change. South and Eastern Europe is going to start 1880 and definitely have an incline. And then 1880s, right here, you can see a huge drop off on Asian immigration. And that's going to be because of the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, where for 10 years basically put a hiatus on Chinese immigration. People that are coming in, for these new immigrants especially, they are kind of gravitating towards these ethnic neighborhoods, kind of seeing them as a transitional community, but it's going to, another reason why more nativists are going to outcry against the new immigrants. You do have immigrant associations to kind of help with this process, trying to kind of preserve the old culture. If you were a Jewish immigrant or you were an Italian immigrant, and you could go to your particular immigrant association and they would help you transition. A couple of things before we move on to this, just on the ideas on nativism and immigrants, more facts. You also had an emergence of more anti-Catholic and anti-Semitic groups. American Protective Association, APA, devoted to stopping the flow of immigrants. You had them promoting more American language, quote-unquote American language, American customs. Starting to suspect more work of a criminal nature, so there's a lot of discrimination against them. People that were looking for immigrant restriction were people like Henry Lodge, who took up the cause of trying to maybe exclude illiterate foreigners, trying to maybe push through a literacy opportunity. It's going to, start looking at ways to exclude people, not just the Chinese Exclusion Act, but maybe to extending that to other groups. The popular culture changes, which we're going to get into next, I will start with a new video. So we'll stop here.